I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my expose on the lands, legends, planes, and planeswalkers of Magic the Gathering, where I introduced you to parts of the world setting, places, peoples, and things you can discover that teach you about the world of Magic the Gathering. So this week, I'm introducing a new plane to you. Technically half a plane. Lorwyn. Now, Lorwyn is actually part of a dual set of planes, Lorwyn and Shadowmeer, which are mirrors of each other. And I will be talking about Shadowmeer separately at a future date and time, but know this, that now the two have merged together effectively into one plane, because they really were technically one plane to begin with, and they just altered between day and night. Now they have both, but we don't know what happens. I'll talk about that a little later. But Lorwyn itself is this plane that is known before being eternally spring, eternally green and lush. What we know of the plane takes place in this kind of lush, foresty area in the center of this massive rings of mountain. Beyond that is an area known as the Primal Verge, which is not a lot is known about or described, at least based upon the information provided in the sets and the novels associated with it. As I said, it's a very foresty area, but there are no oceans, no lakes. In fact, there are only rivers and streams that sort of crisscross throughout there. They're all connected in this area, kind of deep underground caverns known as the Deep Meanders. Now, there are 8 main races that exist within there. There's the elves, kithkin, flamekin, boggards, giants, treefolk, marrow, and fairies. These are the main 8 tribes, as they're called. But in fact, there are 9 tribes, because there are a couple other creatures that exist out there in Lorwyn that are very important. Of course, they have all these natural things, but they also have some supernatural things, including elementals, which are an intrinsic part of the world. And then there comes the 9th tribe, changelings, a shape-changing type race that is barely intelligent, but sort of finds itself in this 9th tribe position and amongst all the others. Now, Lorwyn is known as a land without winter, without night. It seems a perpetual day where the sun never really sets. It kind of moves around the sky, and it is always spring-like when it occurs there. And in fact, is also one of the planes that does not seem to have naturally occurring humans. One of the few that actually exists in all the multiverse. Now, those 9 tribes tend to be very individual. They tend to be very separated, keeping to themselves, I guess would be the best way to describe it. But that means also that they have some skirmishes, battles between them, but nothing huge. They do kind of get into these scuffles and things, but no all-out wars. They've kind of under the control of the cruel and dictatorship of the elves. The elves are sort of the de facto leaders of Lorwyn that have their kind of cruel mitt and everything that control it all, and that sort of keeps the other races to each other. Because there's this kind of backwater nature to it and this kind of like idyllic paradise, planeswalkers don't tend to visit Lorwyn. And until that modern history where Lorwyn itself disappeared, the barriers between the races actually were beginning to break down a little bit, and there was some kind of mixtures in between them. So things had begun to change in Lorwyn before the next cycle of Shadowmeer happened, which we'll talk about a little bit, leading up to the time where it all ended and it became one plane again, one form of it. Now, let's talk about the tribes. Boggards. Boggards are Lorwyn's goblins, effectively. They look a little different than most of the other goblins you picture from other places. And they're kind of these tricksterish race that likes to take little things from people. They live in these areas known as warrens, led over by an elder called an auntie. They're called an auntie regardless of male or female, may we note too. But they have this way of going about things that they really only have one law, and that's share, because they live for new experiences, for finding new things, for discovery, so they often take things for people. So these warrens are really like junk piles of stolen goods, and the point is, hoarders are bad in boggart society. You want to be a sharer. You maybe stole something from a giant, but you want to share it with everyone else in your warren, have them have the same experience of finding this object that you managed to acquire. Hoarders are banished from the tribe. Let's talk about, though, elementals, just for a bit on the side, too, now. Because elementals, though not a tribe, are very important to Lorwyn. They exist almost as manifestations of the hopes, the dreams, and the hatred, the anger, the fear of the races around them, that they seem to exist with these extreme emotions. If battles occur, more warlike elementals are going to appear associated with this. In times of peace, more these peaceful, like, hope-driven elementals appear associated with it, and they kind of tide ebbs and flows of their existence. And of course, there are even greater elementals, which are more deeply connected with not only these feelings, but the elements of the very nature that they're associated with it. Oftentimes very animalistic, that are revered by many of these tribes as almost divine creatures. Now, I want to briefly mention the Flamekin, because they are an interesting creature made of fire and stone that seem to have intrinsic connections to the elemental creatures of the world. They are very fickle creatures that oftentimes have wild swings in the way that they do things, but there is a group within them called the Brighthearth who are working to solidify them and to also build connections with some of the other tribes to make them seem less erratic of creatures. And as I said, so they seem very elemental. They actually have this entire, more than just a connection seemingly physically, they have this spiritual connection that exists between them and the elementals of Lorwyn. Let's talk about the elves, because they're probably a very important one to talk about, being these kind of calculating rulers, almost predatory creatures that exist above all in Lorwyn. They're very merciless, and they look down on the other races completely. They believe beauty above all, perfection above all. To the top of the world is perfection, and their society is divided up according to the beauty of the people there. There is this level of perfection that they kind of divide up their society between Eyeblights, which are the ugly elves, and all the other races, which are sort of the lowest rungs of the ladder, just down there, the dredges of their society. And then a caste system, depending on how beautiful they are, up to the ones that are considered truly perfect, which could just murder the Eyeblights willy-nilly and no one would stop them. They could just kill off whoever they wanted to and it would be fine within their society. And they've got this caste system based upon it that divides their power based on this beauty, and they believe in the sort of manipulation of nature, different than many other elves, to seek the perfection in it. They're known to cultivate a white flower known as moonglow. This, when refined, creates a powerful toxin, even strong enough in the smallest bit to kill giants. And they use it to sort of enact their rulership and eliminate those that they need to, that I find are dangerous. Let's talk about fairies, because fairies are an interesting creature amongst them. The Fae. They all give reverence to Ona, Queen of the Fae, this mysterious figure that is not really seen about in Lorwyn's history. A little spoilerish here, just because, spoiling some information for the set. It is Ona herself that has created this day-night cycle of the Shadowmeer and Lorwyn. And so, therefore, it is her. The fairies are effectively the only ones unaffected by this entire exchange, pretty much. A little bit. They exist in these cliques, these small groups that travel around together. They are kind of childish, pranksterish. They love to play, but they also can be very cruel when crossed. They don't like to be messed with. Now, giants are huge creatures, and because of that, they take up a lot of space and find themselves very territorial. Then they are sort of single-minded. If they love you, it's going to take a lot to get them to change their mind. They're going to love you for a period of time. If they get angry with you, it could be like the slightest thing. They might be angry with you for weeks or even months before they recover to a point in time where you could talk to one again. They oftentimes are filmed roles of like nomads, travelers, explorers. They move around a lot because some of them move around a lot because of their size and such. And as I said, they're very territorial because they have to niche out a place. Let's talk Kithkin. Kithkin are these small humanoids often associated with white mana that live in these sort of villages called Klachan. They're ruled over by the Sens, or the town leaders of these places, and the biggest of which is Kinsbale. Kithkin form the society of this world. They're very civilized, friendly, they love people, they connect with a lot of people, and the fact is they have this sort of psychic connection between all of them, this thought weft, as it's called, this connection between all of them. They sort of feel and understand all of each other. So it comes to the fact that, anybody can be friendly with a Kithkin. If you anger one, you anger them all. So it's good to have one as a friend, definitely. And they're willing to accept anybody to visit their villages. They're willing to take you in and visit even other races. They're also very excellent craftsmen and builders. They build flying ships and societies and construct things much more than any other race. So they have what would be called civilization in many minds. Elves would probably have that too with their forest cities, but the Kithkin have their own version of it that probably mimics humans the most. They're also incredibly superstitious, and one of the races that gives the main reverence to the greater elementals. Now, the merfolk of Lorwyn are called the Marrow. They don't have any oceans or lakes to live in, so they are masters of the rivers and the streams, areas known as the Marrow Lanes. They often act as diplomats, traders, merchants, things like that, because they can travel these lanes and deliver goods and information very rapidly. They're not good on land. They're excellent in water. They live in schools of merfolk lorded over by a regery. There are many different schools. Some of them keep to themselves. Others, work together. There are even some that like to explore the dangerous areas of the deep meanders. Though few do try to venture that deep into the underbelly of Lorwyn. They can still use some of that, the sort of outer edges of it, to travel. Like maybe they would come up in the middle of the village, because they know they have access to it. Now let's talk about treefolk, because they are the longest lived and the greatest memories of all races in Lorwyn. Like all trees, they start out as a seedling, which, under some process called the rising, transforms into a sentient treefolk. Treefolk often kind of grow up in these groves where they learn knowledge and shelter to each other until they get to more of an adult form, where they travel out into the world sharing their knowledge and sharing the protection of them as a tree, as a tree folk. Now, the tree folk vary depending on their species, if an ash tree would different be an oak tree, and they sort of have attitudes and ways of doing things dependent on the type of tree that they actually come from to become a tree folk. Now, there is a type of tree folk that has all but died out, nearly extinct, the poisonous yew tree. Very few tree folk existed of them, and most of them are gone now. Only one is really known, the ancient and knowledgeable Kulfener. Now let's talk about the enigmatic 9th tribe, Changelings. Changelings are barely intelligent creatures that exist almost everywhere across every tribe and every group throughout Lorwyn. They appear normally as these sort of translucent blue-greenish skinned creatures, but they have this reflexive ability to mimic whatever race they are around. And the thing is, it's like a chameleon is uncontrolled and just reflexive they do it. They don't really have a control over their shape-changing ability. They just do it whenever they're around races to look like them. And the thing is, though, they're kind of obviously noticeable. They still have that translucent kind of sheen to their skin that doesn't hide them. They don't have an intelligible language anybody can understand either, but they're great at mimicry. Not really deception, because, again, they're kind of obvious, but they can mimic things excellent. They tend to not have any kind of culture or organization of their own and just exist throughout, showing up throughout all the races and are sort of accepted by them. They do seem to have an affinity with the Cavern of Velis Vale, though, a mysterious place that is really unsure why there's this connection between them, but it exists. So as I was saying earlier, Ona, Queen of the Fae, she was behind this sort of switch between the day and night cycle that occurred over a number of centuries. And it was eventually her defeat and sort of banishment from the realm, her destruction, that caused this to end. When a replacement was found, Marlene, when she sort of has taken over for the position of Ona and returned Lorwyn/Shadowmeer to its normal day-night cycle. Of course, she is put in her position that, should she mess with things again, one of the elves, a friend of hers who helped her in this quest, has some moon glow to kill her off, to stop it from happening again. But now we don't know what's happened with this new combined lands of day and night, where things have returned to sort of a normal cycle for a plane. So the result of that's unknown, because this is after the evening tide, the set of it, that we've seen here what Lorwyn was like, moving into morning tide, the set, which I will talk about these in the future, giving you some information more about the sets, but the plane of Lorwyn, plane of Shadowmeer, neither exist anymore, really. Something else is in its place, a combination between the two of them. Because they were mirrors. They were shadows of each other. Those that existed within the planes didn't remember when the things changed over. They didn't remember they changed from this luscious green area of life and happiness to this horrible place of barely surviving ever night. But perhaps we'll visit the plane again, see what it's become. So that's it for this week. I introduced you to the plane of Lorwyn. An interesting place which technically doesn't exist anymore, not in the way that you'd think it would, and the many races that are there. There, of course, are plenty of places to visit within there, and maybe I'll do some videos on those places to visit within Lorwyn. But soon I'll be doing a video talking about Shadowmeer, the opposite of it. It's mirror, because when you do one, you should really talk about both of them. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. Show support for the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon linked in the description below. If you want to check out some more Magic-related content, I would suggest my friends from the multiverse, Card Bazaar, They Said, We Said, and of course Tasty Snackies, all great Magic producers here on YouTube. Go ahead and check them out too. As I said, it's under my Allies of the Empire. I would definitely recommend them. Great people. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.